Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we will be going over Rhino. First things first, let's go into the build. So I was running a build similar to this, though I wasn't running this exactly. This is just slightly better than what I was running. If you find yourself having energy issues, you can run the build that I was running in the actual mission, which was instead of a rank 4 streamline, which we were running purposely to get our shield gate back on Iron Skin and Pillage. Instead, you can opt for max rank streamline and 3 auger mods on the main build. And now you'll still shield gate from your 2 and 3, but you lose 44% strength, but you get 5% efficiency and 30% range. The 30% range isn't that important, but it does help a little bit for the stomp. The stomp is okay. It is a very good hard CC that you can use if you're ever in trouble, and it also works on the Acolyte for the speed decrease, which is also very good, but you don't really need range to use it on the Acolyte, so it's kind of eh. The range doesn't really do all too much at the end of the day. If you do not like shield gate builds, or you find shield gate builds annoying to play, there is a workaround. While it still is a shield gate build, you're not entirely relying on shield gate to survive. You will have a decent armor and decent health, but you're still running Brief Respite and the 2 auger mods. This is because you can't really make use of adaptation with Rhino, because whenever Iron Skin is up, your adaptation stacks will run out. And honestly, there's just no real reason to not just run a shield gate build on him anyway, because you're just going to be keeping Iron Skin up at all times. So you just want to make sure you don't die in that split second where you press Iron Skin, and in between you pressing Iron Skin and you going invincible. So yeah, these are the 2 builds that I would recommend. Something like this if you want a bit more survivability without entirely relying on shield gating, or this if you find yourself able to stay alive completely fine. As for the rest of the build, I was running the Vermisplicer. This weapon is very often overlooked. If you're ever playing a Warframe that buffs weapons, this weapon is absolutely cracked. It does have a high Riven dispo, and I would say that you really want a Riven that has either fire rate or multi-shot on it with any negative, and the other stat doesn't matter. Obviously, ideally, you would want fire rate, multi-shot, and then something like crit chance or crit damage, but mostly you just want fire rate or multi-shot with any other stat that does something and a negative that doesn't ruin the weapon. I would highly suggest this weapon. It is a very fun weapon, but again, as I said, it kind of relies on a bit of help from Warframe buffs. But in the right circumstances, this weapon is insane. As for the rest of the loadout and the actual mission, I was running an Epitaph. I pretty much never used it. Same with the dual carries. I had the dual carries, I pretty much never used it. I only died twice, and in the rest of the mission I felt completely invincible. The 2 times I died were due to Acolytes, and the reason was because I didn't have a good way to deal with Acolytes at range, so I was just dying to violence. So I opted for switching out the Epitaph, which I wasn't really using anyway, for the Latum, which can very easily deal with Acolytes at range, and then the Glaive Prime, which can also very easily deal with Acolytes at range. But honestly, you're fine with just picking one or the other and then using something else of your choice in the other slot. You don't really need both. You just need to make sure that you have something in your kit to help you kill Acolytes at range so you don't die to violence. As for the focus school, you want to use Moderai for the 40% power strength and also the 50% casting speed. The 50% casting speed is very nice for Iron Skin for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. You don't want to press Iron Skin and then die in that split second between pressing Iron Skin and then it making you invincible. Same thing with Pillage. And then as for your cat, it's just a standard Panzer loadout with the synth mods. Moving on to the ranking portion of the video, we will be discussing Rhino in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly, his kills per minute. Secondly, his survivability. thirdly, his viability in different game modes, and finally, how fun he is to play. All of this data is sampled from a 1-hour solo Steel Path Mott run in the Void, as it is the hardest mission in the game, with no specters and no on-call. So, moving on to the first topic, his kills per minute. There's not really too much to say about his kills. He's just a standard gun frame where you can just use an AoE weapon and run around freely nuking everything. One thing is, Roar does significantly buff some of the AoE weapons, such as the Vermisplicer, and that does significantly increase the KPM because weapons like the Vermisplicer, in my opinion, are honestly one of the best AoE weapons in the game. It's just that they need a little bit of extra oomph. The Slurpgun just needs a little bit more, and then when it has that, it just deletes all of the enemies. Like, it's so good because it chains to, I think it chains to 4 enemies, so you're hitting 5 enemies at once with the Vermisplicer, and with buffs, it pretty much just instantly nukes them. And it's not just that Rhino, with the build I was using, has Roar. I'm also using Pillage to armor strip them, so it also scales forever. And it will continue to be a large AoE nuke, even up into the very, very high levels. I think I averaged like 85 to 90, I think about 90 kills per minute in this run, and for just a standard Warframe that doesn't really have any abilities to actually kill themselves and entirely relying on weapons, with nothing really fancy going on, that's very good, especially whenever you consider his survivability. So for his overall KPM, I'm going to give a flat A. Now moving on to his survivability, oh god, again, there's not really all too much to say here. It's Rhino. Rhino is one of the tankiest Warframes in the game, especially with Pillage. All you do is press Iron Skin and then immediately press Pillage and you can't die. There's only 3 ways you can die as Rhino. You either die to Misery, because Misery spawns Violence, or you die to Violence himself, or you die to Toxin damage. Those are the only ways you die. 2 of them are just Violence, and realistically, if you just, every time Misery spawned, you summoned an on-call, you would never die from that. Especially because versus Violence himself, it's not really that big of a deal. As long as you are paying attention and you play well. You won't die to just Violence by himself. But Misery can spawn 2 to 3 Violences, and that can easily kill you. But when that happens, in an actual mission without restricting yourself, you would just throw down your on-call every time Misery spawned. And you would be completely fine. The only other way you can die is in very high levels from toxic damage. Outside of that, if you die as Rhino, it is entirely your fault. This frame is absolutely busted. He is, in terms of survivability. So, his survivability is easily S. It might be S+. And you know what? It's S+. Like, if you die as Rhino, it is entirely your fault. He is so tanky, and then the best part about him is, like, you don't even need that much. You don't even need to put that much work into the build to make him good. He's such a good early game Warframe. He's easy to get. He doesn't require anything fancy. He just works. And he's just so tanky, and he also helps the team. Like, his survivability easily deserves an S+. Now, moving on to his viability in the different game modes. Again, this is where he falls off a little bit, because he doesn't really have a way to do defense game modes that well. He has CC in his 4, but it's definitely not enough to keep defense objectives alive, specifically excavators. And Steel Path, like, the actual defense objective will never die, so that's not a problem. The mobile defense objective can die, and excavators can very easily die. So mobile defense he's not that good on, and excavators he's terrible on. Defense missions he's fine. Exterminates and all that other stuff, he's fine, but he doesn't really have a way to kill enemies behind walls and stuff, so other frames are better. You could also just use AoE weapons, but in a group setting, Rhino excels everywhere. Why? Because he has a full strength roar. So in a group, nobody's ever going to complain that there's a Rhino on the team. And if they are, they're legitimately stupid, but that's besides the point. So Rhino, although he's not that great in some of the mission types himself, in group play he's good in all of them. And by himself he's good in most of them. If not good, he's at least okay. So for his overall viability, I'll probably give it just a solid A, for the reasons I stated. And then finally, the fourth topic, how fun he is to play. This is a bit subjective, and Rhino, he does have a few pluses to how fun he is. The first major plus is the fact that he's one of the few Warframes in the game where, at least with helmets, you actually use all 4 of his abilities. I know that that's a crazy concept, but the fact that that needs to be said, he can use all 4 of his abilities. That automatically makes him more fun than some of the other Warframes. But his abilities aren't really interesting. Like, Roar is just a buff that you cast once every 40 seconds. Iron Skin is just a buff that you have to micromanage, and if you fail to, you'll die, but that's whatever. And then you subsume Pillage over his 1, because his 1 is terrible unless you're using a meme build. And Pillage isn't really that interesting. And then his 4 is good. Like, it's like a 95% slow, I believe. And then it's also the hard CC. And that's good, but it's also not that interesting. So you're really just running around shooting your guns. You do a lot of damage from Roar, so that's kind of fun. But overall, it's not the most exciting or thrilling gameplay. There's nothing crazy that's going to happen when you play Rhino. Like, maybe, sure, you'll like randomly hit like a 5 mil hit or something, I don't know, but overall he's not exactly the most fun Warframe. So for his fun, I will have to give him a B or a B minus. I will go with B to be a little fairer. In conclusion, Rhino is a solid A tier Warframe due to the fact that he has a full strength roar. He's extremely tanky, he's viable in pretty much every game mode except for Excavator by himself. He's really good at Disruption, he can be okay in Exterminate, he buffs your team, and the fact that he's semi-fun to play.